Thank you for inviting me here. Many of you I've known over the years and have been defining in my life and in my growth. Certainly, I just have to give a special shout out to Dave Sprinson, who invited me today. I still have his book in Camus that he wrote years ago that I treasure. And I hear, David, you got a new book coming out. What's the new book? I'm trying to plug your book here.
Well, there's a little celebration. It's coming Friday. We have little flyers in the back.
Oh, okay, good. Well, if I can't make it, at least I want to buy your book. Okay, so I'm looking forward to that.
I'm not really trying to promote it with my friends.
Okay, but we'll celebrate your book anyway. But celebrating you for sure, what you meant to me, and many of you have been so important to me over the course of my political activism, including the teachers union. Thank you for all you did for not just unions, but for our public education as well. Grateful to you. And I'm so so honored to be able to speak to you today, because you use the word inspiring, and I think inspiration has to be the hallmark of how we move forward. I came back last night from a conference I attended in London. It was in memory of Sir Harry Evans. He was knighted by the Queen and voted by his peers in Great Britain to be the finest editor in the past 100 years in British news reporting for his breakthrough investigative work. And his wife, Tina Brown, established this foundation where I heard from people who were podcasters from around the country, American journalists like Jeffrey Goldberg, individuals like Yuri Navalny's widow. Navalny, you may remember, was poisoned and killed by Vladimir Putin. And she's out there as a champion for human rights and can't go anywhere without massive security around her. It was a small conference, but it was wonderful to be amongst all these people. This podcaster from India who's being shut down by the Modi government, another journalist in Afghanistan who's being targeted by the Taliban. So forgive me if I don't feel very sympathetic to Lisa Murkowski when she says we're all frightened because of Donald Trump. What's the worst she's going to face? A primary and maybe a job as a lobbyist? I mean, these people are putting themselves on the line every day. And in many ways, that's our mission here as well. And our challenge, though, is not to storm the beaches in Normandy, not to take on the Taliban, not to worry about being poisoned by Putin. Our challenge is to make phone calls, write postcards, go door to door, get our neighbors out and voting, get people involved in the process. And we can do it, and we can do it successfully because we've done it successfully. We all forget that after Donald Trump won in 2016, we had a massive Democratic win in 2018, then threw him out of office in another Democratic sweep in 2020. But we've lost that confidence, and we've lost that sense of purpose. And I think that's what worries me more than anything right now as we face the challenges ahead of us. And it's something where I think now look, Democrats certainly, and activists certainly, have got to, I think, take different approaches, look at things differently. My own personal life experiences have also been a good education in that regard as well. I'm going to talk a bit about that as well. But really, our challenge in front of us right now is how we mobilize going forward. They're counting on us to be exhausted. They're very clear. Their strategy is just to exhaust us, overwhelm the media, and just really exhaust us into submission. And I think what we're seeing right now, the energy we're witnessing. I was at a Tesla rally it was exit M3 off the Meadowbrook. Not an easy place to get to. You know, my friends in the city, you get 300 people on a street corner just because it's 12 noon or 1 in the afternoon. It's no big, they get no credit for that. But we had about 250 people at 4 in the afternoon. Now here on Long Island, that's the time people are getting their kids from school, or they're getting dinner ready, going over homework, whatever it may be. But 250 people rallied together. They've been doing it all over Long Island at Tesla centers and other sites to stand up. You saw the hands-off rally produce thousands of people marching. One reporter told me it was comparable to the anti-Vietnam War protests and the anti-Shoreham protests that took place. That level of energy. I spoke at a rally over the Northport VA. There had to be about 150 veterans. I would say about a good 85 to 100 voted for Donald Trump. And they were just angry, hurt, frustrated by what they witnessed in front of them, by what they saw happening over 70,000 people being fired from the Veterans Administration. And the tactic is they'll say they're not cutting veterans programs, but they're making it harder and harder to get access to these programs. The programs have had to be expanded because of the burn pits in Afghanistan, more veterans exposed to toxins. The programs have been expanded because of the needs for many of our first responders at 9/11. So the services have been expanded, but to get someone on the phone, to get an appointment becomes more difficult. The same with Social Security. They're not going to officially oppose Social Security, just make it harder for you to get access to it. Closing an office in White Plains, so you got to go to Connecticut. Making people report to the office versus doing it on phone or by computer. And coming up with various schemes and arguments about fraud, all of which have never been checked out, all of which, in fact, have been documented by independent media to be false. So people, I believe, we're seeing a movement build on the grassroots level. Let's not kid ourselves. No one's putting a cape on, no one's putting on a cape and flying over the Capitol. No one's holding a magical press conference. No one's going to be holding we're not seeing anyone emerge as a superhero out of Washington. We're all going to have to be our own superheroes to get this job done. And that's usually the way any real reform is ever achieved. But we have to do things differently. We have to be able to understand, there's an old expression from Mark Twain, it's easier to fool the people than convince the people they've been fooled. Think about that. It's really true. It's easier to fool the people than convince the people they've been fooled. And you have to resist the temptation to look at them and say, what the heck were you thinking? Or to say, I told you so, as tempting as that is. It's more about the way we can build shared values together. Put aside it's bigger than, what we're facing is bigger than Democrat or Republican, left or right. It's about the values we share as citizens. And that's what's going to unite us against the autocracy we're facing, against the kind of oligarchy we're facing. So we have to be able to have those shared values. And frankly, we can't be such an exclusive club. I got to tell you, even the left now is attacking Bernie Sanders for not being progressive. Now, when you reach that stage, it seems as I see this as a Democrat. Every time we bring people in, we make it harder and harder to stay in. I mean, there's an argument about the way we handle the court crisis. Many believe in expanding the Supreme Court. Senator Sanders does not. He believes, and he's made a very strong case for rotating judges on the bench, for the idea of having term limits. Obviously, Clarence Thomas should face impeachment. There are many reforms that should be in place with the Supreme Court, including ethics accounting, because any other judge who did what Clarence Thomas did, or Alito did, would be removed from the bench. And Clarence Thomas's place probably face some level of prosecution. So, but the idea that we're now denouncing him, or some are denouncing him for not being progressive enough, is just absurd. And in many ways, we also shouldn't be afraid of the crowds that are emerging together for Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Sanders. You see them drawing 20,000 people at a time at these rallies around the country. Doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that Ocasio-Cortez and Sanders are saying. That's not the point. The point is we have to welcome the energy, welcome the engagement, and build on that support. And understand that what we're facing in front of us as a nation is so much more important than I think any challenge we face perhaps since the Civil War. That's the risk we're trying to face as a country. And I think also we have to be able to hold not just our public officials, Democrats and Republicans alike, but also hold the media more accountable as well, and demand greater scrutiny in their reporting, greater analysis in what they do. I mean, I can just say when I was running for Congress, some of you may know I ran for Congress in 2022 against George Santos. Or I think as you said to me when I was here, think of all the trouble you could have avoided if I just won. That's dawned on me many times too. Now I have to tell you, I'm very proud to have been the Democratic nominee. I was very proud of our campaign. We faced obstacles in that race that the media as well, as you know, we lost 5 Democratic-leaning congressional seats in New York State. We lost the Democratic majority in New York State. As Nancy Pelosi pointed out, we lost it because, frankly, the governor failed to address the issue of crime that was on people's minds. And we weren't listening to people and talking to people. I mean, one of the things Bernie Sanders talks a lot about is he always says, we have to talk to people we don't agree with. We've got to engage with them. Not to argue with them, but understand their frustrations and their sufferings and their concerns. We have to listen to what they're saying. And that's been missing in our dialogue. Governor Hochul didn't address the issue of crime. Everywhere I went throughout the district, I was getting more questions on bail reform in the state legislature than on Congress. And you can say, well, the statistics show something different and the stats prove otherwise. Almost everybody from the AAPI community I met felt they were under assault and threatened. They felt it because of discrimination, because of the Trump, remember the Trump claim using the words China virus? They felt targeted. Many were assaulted or shouted at. The bottom line is, if they're feeling that pain, we have to understand it, respect it, and listen to them. And we've got to understand that, not everyone's going to agree with us on gun safety, which is a very defining issue to me. But if they want to make sure their children feel safe in school and are not the victims of any threats of gun violence, okay, they're on the club. They're in the team. That's fine. We'll find a way to work with them. Not everyone wants to march with us in a protest or march with us on Pride Month. But if they support my right to do it, that's good enough for me. We've got to be more accepting and inclusive in that regard. But, so I was saying before, understanding that was one of the factors we faced. I mean, we had redistricting that was the Democrats so screwed up redistricting that the courts threw out the lines. We had a Republican judge drawing the congressional districts. That's how the one I ran in became about 9 or 10% more Republican. And of course, we had Carolyn Maloney and we had Jerry Nadler drawn into the same district. So the real, as my nephew said to me, couldn't you lose like a normal person? But it was a challenging year because of the Republican landslide in our state and because of the redistricting. But the greatest frustration I personally faced, and this goes back to the issue of accountability, is the fact that even though we didn't have everything on Santos, there was an 87-page report done on him by the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Even though they missed a lot of stuff, they also nailed a lot of important stuff too. And getting the media to engage and to focus on local races is so important. And they've all acknowledged, the New York Times, Newsday, local TV like Rosanna Scotto and Errol Lewis have acknowledged this, that even though we sounded the alarm on this guy, they didn't have the staff or personnel to cover these races. Maggie Haberman from the Times said, we cover the marquee races. That's just how it works. We don't have, Errol Lewis said, these local races fall through the cracks. We don't have the personnel to deal with it. And so that was a great frustration about that campaign, that we couldn't get the story told. And in fairness, because of the redistricting fiasco, we only had 2 months for the general election. So it was harder to tell the story. Or as one reporter said to me when I was running, it'd be a great story if he wins. And that reporter was right, it was a great story. I just wish it was told her. I went through a few pints of Haagen-Dazs thinking about that recently. But anyway, that being said, accountability is critical. We should be as vigilant with our local officials and with the media as possible. If you don't see races there's nothing wrong with picking up the phone. That's the operative word, picking up the phone, not texting or emailing, because they get ignored, and saying to a reporter, why aren't you looking at this candidate or this race or these issues? Let them know how you feel. It is critical. Newsday, of all publications, learned that lesson when I ran. They publicly apologized, but regardless of that, they have to be reminded, because let's face it, we're losing 1 or 2 weekly newspapers literally every week in America. They're shutting down. We're seeing major staff layoffs. And as this conference in London highlighted, the front line of defense of our democracy is local journalism. So it's what I faced in my races. Frankly, the issues are much bigger than me and my own personal sadness and my own personal heartbreak. There's much more at stake here. What we're facing is really an issue that if we don't reinvigorate our media and re-engage our media, then in fact, we lose a major protector of our democracy. And we also have to remember, autocracy doesn't work too well. Let's be realistic about it. Autocrats tend to get thrown out, sometimes beheaded. I'm not suggesting that for the record, but but we have to be vigilant out there all the time. And you're seeing it now. You're seeing Republicans are refusing to hold town halls. And Democratic members of Congress are going into those Republican districts around the country and holding town halls and getting great crowds. It speaks to the energy around the country. You're seeing the Democrats have put together a rapid response team, a new technology division. So they're catching up with the people. That's always the case. The political establishment always runs behind the people. That's nothing new. You folks have been ahead of the curve your whole life. But all that being said is that the challenge that we have right now and the challenge we have right now is an opportunity to engage people in our political process like never before. It's an opportunity to reinvigorate a sense of energy and a sense of activism that has been missing. The Democratic turnout, quite frankly, was dismally low in 2022. About 45% of Democrats showed up, compared to 64% Republican. And then, independents presented a certain, I think, about maybe 30% independents. And in the presidential, we had about 12 million Democrats didn't show up to vote around the country. And Trump won, not with 49, he didn't win 49 states. He won 49.5% of the vote. So allow this to be determined as a mandate is really a fool's errand. The race was within the margin of error like the pollsters predicted. The wrong side of the margin, but nevertheless in the margin of error. So we have a chance now that the country is waking up to the realities we're facing, and this week will be very telling with the budget bill before us, where we'll see what their plans are as it unfolds for Medicaid, for Social Security, for Medicare. The DOGE program by Elon Musk, it didn't cut, I think it cut back, it only cut back 2% of what he predicted he would cut. He said he cut $2 trillion. I think generously you could say he cut $65 billion, not $2 trillion. I think that's 2% of what he claimed he would cut. It was an absolute fiasco. And what he targeted was not waste and fraud and abuse, because the reality is the first thing he cut from the budget were the inspector generals and the whistleblowers, the people who have been successful at rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. Also the people who were investigating his $13 billion of government contracts. This is nothing more than an effort, and we're seeing it playing out this week, to divide our country, to target not just people in need, but to target middle-class people too. Middle-class people, people who are trying to work their way up. Every election is about those who want to work their way up and those who are already there. And it's very clear who their target is. It's not for the ones who are already there. They're going to be taken care of. But the ones who want to find a better path forward. So that's really, to me, our mission. And I look at this, I know believe me, we all know the obstacles ahead of us. We all know the frustrations. But when I see Democrats say, well, we need, or other people say, we need a thug to compete with Donald Trump. Well, he's already got the thug vote. We're not going to get that. When I see people say, why can't we be like Mitch McConnell? It's important to remember, Mitch McConnell lost a lot more than he won when he was the Republican leader of the Senate. And Schumer, who's been only the leader for 8 years, he's been in the majority 50% of the time, which is a pretty high record. So my point to you simply is, it's important that we use this time of great frustration and fear and anguish to rally together and use it as a great time of activism to reinvigorate our political process, reinvigorate people who have not been engaged before. Quite frankly, we lost that, which is why we're in the situation now. It's our chance to take the country back and take our democracy back. Thank you. Are there any questions or anything? Yeah, let's do questions. Any comments, thoughts? Sir, yes, I'll go with you first. Oh, okay.
Well, thank you for coming and expressing all those thoughts. I have a few of my own that I hope you could comment on. My name is Rick Shaper, by the way. I believe the amorphous middle of the voting public is what swing elections. Perhaps you do too. And I also see that the traditional media is dying. As you pointed out, they didn't have the staff to cover local elections. So there needs to be a substitute perhaps electronic media somehow. And the third thing is there needs to be a concise slogan. MAGA is a very powerful slogan. The Democrats don't have one. And I'll add to that that we should be looking to the middle ground. There are many sincere Republicans who hate Trump, and we should be cooperating together. Those are my thoughts, and I'd like your comments. Thank you.
They're great thoughts, and thank you for them. I mean, it's first, they're really important thoughts. First, regarding legacy media. At this conference I attended, the editor-in-chief of the New York Times was there, as was the editor-in-chief of I guess called the executive producer of CNN networks internationally and nationally. And a number of other legacy media folks were there. I think it's important to remember that there was a time that the media said Huffington Post was the new New York Times, or BuzzFeed was going to take over the media, or Vice News was going to dominate. And of course, that's faded. But to your point, which is so critical, legacy media has to adapt. They've got to bring their news to where people receive it. I always say to people, you know, the same consultants who are masters of conventional wisdom, okay? That's what political consultants do. They're, in my view, they're not particularly innovative in their thinking. They just recite the conventional wisdom out there. Now they're saying, everybody, you got to go on Joe Rogan. Okay, I mean, if you're running for president, I guess Kamala Harris should have gone on Joe Rogan. But if you're running for local Congress, for a local office, you first have to figure out where do your public get their news from? Where do they hear their news? And how do they hear it? Is it on their phone? Are there podcasts they're drawn to? Is it a weekly newspaper? Is it Newsday? Is it the New York Post? Is it still the Times? And one of the problems is the Times has given up covering local news, which is, I can tell you about that in detail, but okay. But that being said, my point simply is understanding, it's not about legacy media being dead, it's about, we have to understand that there are different ways people get their news. And the heritage media, the legacy media, the Times, the Washington Post, if you will, they're now adapting. They're doing different types of podcasts, they're doing live town halls, they're doing different kinds of reporting, and they're putting their news across on phones or on put it through your phones, on apps, other devices, streaming it. So media has to change. But I wouldn't necessarily cut out the Wall Street Journal, which has done great investigative work on Trump, by the way. I wouldn't dismiss them. I wouldn't rule out the Times. I wouldn't rule out some of these major media. They have to be more innovative in how they get their coverage across, and they recognize that. It's curious, though, some of those hot names we heard of a few years ago are no longer in the news, and they still are. That's one thing. Secondly, the middle-of-the-road voter. There's no question. They're staying home, or they're not voting with us. And we see that particularly on Long Island. I saw that particularly when I ran. They feel alienated by a Democratic Party that is not talking to them, that has been, in my view, too elite. You have to understand, every time New York City Council puts a legislative idea out there, like, let's have non-documented people vote in local elections, non-citizens voting in local elections. The Republicans run with that. Oh, it was a big deal. They passed it. And they run with that, and it becomes a real distraction from the real issues that affect people's day-to-day lives. And we have to be real about that. Governor Hochul, when she puts out an initiative, she doesn't try to build coalitions around it. She tries to stick it in her budget. That's how they did bail reform. They didn't bring in partners. They didn't educate the public as to what it was. They just put it in the budget. It was Andrew Cuomo did that in his budget. Same thing with her housing proposal. It was so reviled, she ultimately had to withdraw it, but it was ill thought out, not conceived well. And so if you don't build coalitions and bring people together, sometimes have to do things incrementally, you're going to lose you're going to lose the audience that matters to you, those swing voters. They're not going to accept it. And so I think that's one of the ways that we have to address this, because we paid a very serious price, I think, for a New York State government that grew very out of touch. And so I think that's one of the ways we have to reach out to middle-income voters. Also, one way we have to do it, we've got to be on the attack as Democrats. We've got to stand up to the talking points. We didn't lose this last election because of transgender kids or because people stood up for reproductive rights. We didn't stand up for what we believe in and talk about, standing up for unions, standing up for growing the middle class by supporting labor, standing up on the issue of job growth, bringing semiconductor chip manufacturing back to our country. We didn't have confidence in our instincts, and we lost the message about what we believe in. And the idea that the Republicans can claim to be the party of working people, when you see a record which is really just which is literally deliberately destroying the goals and aspirations of middle-class Long Islanders and the middle class around our country, should be a powerful wake-up call. So yeah, I think you're right. We've got to be much more assertive as Democrats. You know, it's fine to talk about finding common ground. That's good. We have to do it to legislate. But this is the time to hold our ground and remind people what we stand for, what we're advocating, and our history of standing up for working people, which is unparalleled and certainly not what Donald Trump represents. So I think that's another piece about that too. In terms of a slogan, I'm with you. You know who's great at that? Nancy Pelosi was great at that. She had that instinct. We can do it. We're not. We can give you a paragraph on a moment's notice. You know, we can give you a chapter anytime you want. But he is, and we shouldn't underestimate Trump's ability to market. His absolute shamelessness at lying about virtually everything. Daniel Dale, if you have a chance on CNN, Daniel Dale does a segment where he fact checks Trump after a speech. And it's just staggering. I mean, and when you ask the White House for documentation, they say, sure, we'll get back to you. And of course, they never do. The most recent one is the deficit in China, the trade deficit exploded to $1 trillion a year under Joe Biden. Well, in fact, the trade deficit was $250 billion a year, which is high, but it's turned out to be lower than the trade deficit under the Trump administration. I mean, it's these effortless lies that he engages in. And by the way, while we're at it, you might want to say to your media folks, why isn't Newsday fact-checking him? Why, you know, when NBC did that famous interview that was out last week, some of you saw it last week, where he said he didn't think he had to uphold the Constitution. A, why are we not talking about that anymore? But B, that interview, all these presidential interviews are done in advance. So they had this in the can, as they say. That's an old expression, but they were like, it was already done. Why didn't they spend 10 minutes afterwards just fact-checking what he said? I'll tell you why they don't. Because they're afraid. You hear this from local reporters in Newsday. You hear it from other reporters around at other media outlets. They're afraid they'll be called partisan. They're afraid they'll be accused of slanting the news if they fact-check. If you notice, the New York Times doesn't even do editorial endorsements anymore. They're afraid of looking partisan. I think the Daily News did 2 of them. Newsday, to their credit, does editorial endorsements. But, so my point to you is holding the media accountable, asking them to fact-check, and not be, the argument they'll give you is, well, we'll print what the Republican says, but then we'll give the Democrat a chance to respond. The answer is, if you print the lies the Republican is saying, or the lies the Democrat is saying, you legitimize them. And you give it credence, and they only have so much room in the story to cover. So it's critical that the media play a role of fact-checking. It's really quite essential. As far as the slogan, I'll get back to you on that. But if you want a chapter, I'll give it to you this afternoon. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Robert, for this really inspiring, empowering talk, really talking so intelligently about the moment that we're all facing. My question to you really has to do with immigrants on Long Island. We all know that immigrants in various places in the country are being threatened with deportation more and more. There have been several roundups on Long Island, Glen Cove, and Hempstead, and Freeport, and Brentwood, et cetera. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas about what we can do to lessen the likelihood, at least, of undocumented immigrants threatened with deportation.
Okay, fine, very good.
Yeah, step back a bit so I hear.
Okay, is it okay? Is it better over here?
It will be.
Okay, sure. You raise such a powerful issue because in the messaging that has broad support of taking the criminals out of our country, they've used that talking point to expand to even U.S. citizens and children. And they use that as an excuse to deny due process. And so first of all, there are many established places that people who are, if they're worried about their status and their rights, there are many places that have been set up to guide them and offer that. I think Hofstra University has one such facility to help with people who are here who are undocumented, trying to figure out what their status is. But we also have to speak up. And we have to make sure that both the Democrats and Republicans in Congress on Long Island as well understand how strongly we feel about this. The idea that literally there is a accepted theory in the administration and by Republicans in Congress, if you notice, they're very quiet about this. They're not suggesting that habeas corpus is sacrosanct. They're not suggesting that due process is protected for all people, not just citizens, but the Constitution made it very clear for all people. Antonin Scalia made that very clear when it was majority opinions, that everyone is entitled to due process. The leading conservative jurist perhaps in the past 50 years. So it's established law in the United States. But what's happening right now is that this theme that has broad acceptance, as it should, to get hardened criminals, murderers out of the country or here illegally, that's now been used as a cover to remove, we're finding out, children, some of whom are receiving medical care, I think 2 receiving cancer care. We're seeing it used to round people up without, literally round them up without any particular, without any evidence, any projection of evidence, and sending them out of the country. I mean, and I think, frankly, this is where I think he overplays his hand. We can't screw it up. We can't, you talk about habeas corpus, no one knows what that means. But you talk about the fact that everyone's entitled to due process, that's the law of our country. You talk about the fact that even U.S. citizens are being rounded up or children are being rounded up. That starts to get hold with people. You saw an 80-year-old member of Congress, a woman in New Jersey, who is now being threatened with arrest by ICE. They claim she body slammed, this is a U.S. Congresswoman, they claim she body slammed an ICE agent. This is the story when the mayor of Jersey City was arrested. You might have seen that story? For being on the job. And he literally doing an inspection that he was invited. In fact, they gave him a tour of the facility. And they claimed he was interfering and they arrested him. And now the government is now threatening to go after these members of Congress who were there. And I saw them interviewed today, and if they're vulnerable to this kind of attack, it sent a chilling message across to the citizenry at large. So I think it's very important that you register your feelings with your members of Congress and let them know how strongly you feel, and also use the facilities that are established that can give guidance to people who are here who are not sure what their status is and how to protect themselves. Sorry for the long answer, but it's a powerful, important topic.
Let's do one more because I saw Ken had his hand up. Ken Pfeiffer.
So much. Oh, good. I was introduced. Thank you. Thank you for your talk. The question I have for you is really around, thinking about all the things that were accomplished in the Biden administration. So we live about 15 miles from this building. When we drive home, we pass 4 signs of projects that were sponsored or are sponsored by the bipartisan infrastructure bill. But the question I have around it is, how could we do a better job of celebrating our successes? You might say publishing our successes, but I'll stick with celebrating.
Speaking of going through pints of Haagen-Dazs, that's one of my favorite topics, okay? I mean, you think about the accomplishments, and they were bipartisan achievements. The semiconductor chip manufacturing program, bringing it the first time to our country, infrastructure legislation, bipartisan gun safety legislation. Not great, but it was better than we ever had in 30 years, okay? The infrastructure bill. I mean, these are truly, not to mention, of course, getting us out of the COVID pandemic. These are truly historic accomplishments and bipartisanly achieved. But frankly, Joe Biden was not an effective communicator. One of the real harsh realities is when he walked on that stage in June for that debate, a good part of the country just totally tuned us out. Didn't believe anything we said after that. That was tragic loss for the country. People just gave up on us at that point. I heard it repeatedly when I was speaking around the country. So it was a real problem. So your point is, how do we do a better job of doing that? Frankly, it is that will determine whether we in fact get back the White House or not, whether we win in the midterms or not, whether we tell that story. And it's something that people are working on real hard. And it's much tougher now because we don't have the White House, but we have to be much more disciplined on our messaging. And one of our problems is we don't stay disciplined in our message. And that's a real, Pelosi and Schumer have been very good about that. That's going to be Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer's challenge here. We're talking about, I mean, really, you get Democrats in the room, they're debating, well, should Chuck Schumer stay as the minority leader? He's there, he's not going anywhere. Will AOC run a primary against him? That's 4 years later, okay? Hope she doesn't, but that's 4 years later. We get caught up in all these tangents. Who's running for president? Talk to me about it after the midterm. We've got one mission in front of us, winning back the House of Representatives. If we don't win back that branch of government, I think we could lose our democracy. We could lose our republic. So we've got to keep very, very focused. And the process begins this year with the local elections. The local victories lead to national victories every time. So it's important to take a stand and be very mindful of that. I thought you had a question. You have something to say? Okay. Okay. Sir. Okay.
Actually, we need to move on. But Robert, do you have a few moments afterwards? Yeah. Then obviously people really want to discuss this. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
It's kind of like therapy sitting here talking to many.